Hey guys, welcome to patternlab.london. Okay, so in this week's tutorial I'm going to show you how to transform a basic bodice block, such as this, and obviously comes with its own sleeve, into a raglan or basic raglan sleeve pattern. Okay, basically, so recently on our Instagram account we had someone ask us, so JK, just here, asked us to create a dropped shoulder seam modification or raglan sleeve, and we've gone for the raglan sleeve. So thank you very much for that request, JK. We're going to start doing that now. So once again, we're going to draft this pattern here, but using one of our basic blocks. Now we have a few different options here for you to actually access these fully editable digital sewing patterns or digital basic blocks. If you head on over to, we have a few different options. So if you go to Pattern Lab, you can either create your own basic block that fits your measurement, so made to measure basic sewing blocks. So for example, we could create the torso block here, and you can do one of two things. You can either choose a standard size from our standard size chart, and as you can see here we have bust, waist and hip. We also have all of the different measurements that go into drafting our blocks, so if you want more precise measurements, just simply click the show more and show less. Also, you can create a profile. So for example, I've already created one. Let's go to Francesca IT008, and you can simply enter all of your measurements, and you can also, we have tutorials that show you how to take those measurements, some descriptions and also some images. So once you've filled in all of these measurements, you can then go back to the lab, you can then select your profile, so Francesca IT08, and then you can start to actually draft your block with all the different various fit options. We have different lengths, and obviously the preview will automatically display your selections. So for the front, at the moment we have a French dart, we can go for, let's say, a mid-shoulder, etc. So you simply go through all of these tabs until you're happy with your block, but you need to download this not as a PDF pattern, because this is not editable, but as an e-pattern. So you want to add to cart an e-pattern, not a PDF pattern. So this is one way, so either using your own personal measurements or choosing from one of our standard size ranges, or we have a sister site called Design Lab. And Design Lab allows you to download or purchase and download, let's say, fully graded pattern nests. So for example, we have the torso block here with waist shaping, and it comes in sizes UK 4 to 24, and we have a big description about this, also including the various eases that are added to this block. So that's one option as well. Anyway, let's get back to our tutorial. So I've just simply, this is actually, you can see here, we're using a Design Lab basic block, and this is just a standard UK size 10. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to simply, I've opened this up in Adobe Illustrator just by going File and then Open, and then obviously find your block and open Adobe Illustrator. But what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to copy and paste this to a brand new document. And the reason why is because I don't want to touch this existing pattern, I want to keep this safe. So let's go File, New Document. Take a little bit of time to load, just because I'm running some screen capture software. And we're just going to add 450 centimeters and 450 centimeters. If you work in inches, you can change this to inches. And let's just click Create. And this is our very, very large pattern page, or let's say our working table. I'm just going to simply paste, hang on, let's go back to our basic blocks. Let's just copy this and paste it into our new document. Okay. Once again, if you're not familiar with digital pattern cutting in Adobe Illustrator, we have a whole series of tutorials that you can follow to give you the basics in Pattern Lab. So if you go to Pattern Lab and go to Courses and then Pattern Making Course, we have a whole series of tutorials that will teach you how to use Adobe Illustrator as a pattern making platform, and also links to our basic blocks, for example, a little bit of an introduction of what we're going to be doing, and then obviously you have all of those tutorials that show you the basics that allow you to follow this tutorial. Just allow you to follow this tutorial a little bit easier. That's not proper English, but you know what I mean. Okay, so first of all, to get started, we're going to start to, let's say, create this raglan concept on this pattern. So first of all, I'm going to get my big selection tool, which is just here, and I'm just going to select all of these blocks. I'm going to go to Object, and then, where is it? Ungroup. Okay, because these patterns come grouped. By that, what I mean is if I click on it, you can see it's selecting the whole pattern. So I want to select everything. So it's going to click and drag with a big selection tool. I'm just going to go Object and then Ungroup. And that just means that they're now all independent elements that we can select and chop. Oh, this one's still grouped. Let's just select it and go Object, Ungroup. How about this one? Yep, this one's fine as well. So first of all, I'm going to start off by making a point. And to do that, I'm just going to get my little square tool here. I'm just going to make a little square. And you can do that simply just by clicking and dragging. If you hold down the Shift key, it will constrain it to an actual square. If you do not have the square, if you do not hold the Shift key down, you can make a very odd looking square. So let's just hold down the Shift key and let's make a little square as a point. Next, we're going to go to our text tool, and I'm just going to call this point A. And we can then just make this a little bit larger. There we go, maybe a little bit smaller perhaps. Just going to drag it close to this point. I'm going to, with my big selection tool, just click and drag, and then go Object, and then group that point. That way when I select it, the whole thing comes with me. Okay, so first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark my raglan on my neckline. So I'm going to go about 2/3 away from the center back. We're going to start with the back first. And then next what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark another point. So I'm just going to simply go, I'm going to select that point with my big selection tool, click select. I'm going to go Edit, Copy, Edit, and then Paste. You can also use the keys on your keyboard. So if you select it, hit Command C or Control C on your keyboard to copy it, and then Control V to paste it. And you can paste a few of these if you want to. Let's just get rid of those. So I've just simply copied and pasted a new point. I'm going to place it at the very bottom of this, let's say, armhole notch here. Okay, I'm just going to place it on this little point here. So I'm just going to simply click on that center point and drag it to that point. And we're also going to call this B. So I'm just going to get my small selection tool, double click on it, and then just press B on my keyboard. Okay, so next what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my point tool, just up here on my pen tool in the top corner. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to click on this top little corner of my point, and then the bottom corner of point B. And let's also get a line fill. So here, if I double click on this little area, it'll bring up my line fill. Let's make it blue so it stands out. Click OK. And then I'm just going to go to my small selection tool to click off. And there we have our line. Now we want to curve this line. If we look at our raglan sleeve, we want to create this beautiful sweeping curve. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my Convert Anchor Point tool, just here, or it's Shift C on your keyboard. I'm just going to click and drag, and I'm going to curve this line very slowly out until it touches the point of this dart. Oh, let's just remove the fill. I'm just going to click on that and then remove with that little icon there. So I'm going to remove the fill. We've now got this line, and it just touches this point, which is fabulous. But what I want to make sure is that this goes through the center of point A. So to do that, let's just zoom in. That's Command and plus on the keyboard. I'm going to get my small selection tool. I'm going to click on that line, and then I'm going to click on the point, and then with my arrow keys I'm going to nudge it down or up or along or in any direction to make sure it hits the middle of that point. It's important that we're actually extending or we're starting this line outside the pattern. I'll explain why in a minute. Same for this point here. Let's just zoom in. So small selection tool, I'm going to click on that line, I'm going to find that point, and I'm just going to, with my arrow keys on the keyboard, just nudge it in until it meets point B. Now let's just check. You see how this is just, because we've moved those points around, it's changed the shape of that line. So I'm just going to move that up ever so slightly. And as you can see, that point is just slightly overlapping that curved line. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to use this line to separate this top half from the actual body of the block. And to do that, first of all, I'm going to make my line width. So at the moment, with this selected, so small selection tool, select the line, then go to stroke, which will be this little three lines here. I'm then going to make it 0.3, which makes it a much finer line. And the reason why is because we're going to go to Object and then expand this line, and just make sure Fill and Stroke is ticked. Click OK, because now it's no longer a line, it's actually an object. And we're going to use this object to basically cut this block. So what I'm going to do is, now this is an object and not a line anymore, I'm going to select with my small selection tool. We're going to be using the small selection tool the most. We have the big selection tool or the selection tool, and we have the direct selection tool. I'm going to use the direct selection tool for most of this. I'm going to click and drag over those two elements, the outline of my block and also this little, let's say, curved line here. I'm then going to go to Pathfinder, which is just here on the right. If you can't find it, go to Window and then tick Pathfinder. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use this one here, and this is the minus front. So basically what we're doing is we're cutting this line from this line here, because this one is on top and this one is behind. If you've drawn this after drawing this, then it'll be on top. So I'm just going to click minus. Now as you can see, that line's disappeared, and we now have this block separated and this block separated, which is ideal. It's exactly what we're looking for. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my big selection tool, I'm going to click, and you see how these are all grouped. I just want to go Object and then Ungroup. Okay, that just allows me to move these separately. If I didn't ungroup them, I would have to move the whole pattern, which is annoying. So let's just go Object, Ungroup, and now we can move them separately. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to basically remove this dart from this panel piece. And to do that, I'm going to get my big selection tool. I'm going to click on this panel here. I'm going to go to the rotate tool, which is just here. And I'm going to click on that point there. And I'm just going to simply swing that closed. Okay? I'm not going to overlap it. I'm not going to have it slightly apart. I'm going to actually meet those lines together. Now, it's really important that you have view and then snap to point. It's really handy to have this on because basically when you have snap to point on, what it does is it will automatically, you see how it almost like snaps? It just snaps to that, which makes it much easier when it comes to joining or moving your patterns. So once again, what we're going to do is simply add our rotation point. So sorry, let's do that again. Get my big section tool, click on this panel here, go to the rotation tool, click on that point, make sure it's on that point, and then just click and drag until we hit that line. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my small selection tool, or the white one. I'm going to click on this panel and I'm going to add a point. So just up here, add point tool, and I'm going to click and add a point anywhere on this line. I'm going to get my small selection tool, I'm just going to click on that point. Oh, wrong one, sorry. Let's click on this panel here just to find the points of this panel. I'm just going to click and drag that over into this panel. Okay, so they're overlapping. They need to be overlapping. And then we're just going to simply select both of these. So small selection tool, click and drag over both of them. And then we're going to click the Unite on the Pathfinder. Okay, so just going to click on the Pathfinder and go Unite. And that basically joins those panels together. So they're now one, essentially. And we've got a few points that we can remove. For example, let's go to our minus point tool, or delete anchor point tool. I'm just going to simply delete, 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 just get rid of a few points. That's looking much cleaner. Also, we can move it away, which is great. So let's do that. Okay, so now we have our panel. I'm going to get my big section tool, I'm just going to move this away. As you can see here, we've got this little kind of point. It's not very attractive. So to create a really beautiful smooth curve here that will match this beautiful smooth curve, what we're going to do is I'm going to go to my small selection tool. I'm going to click on this panel here. I'm going to go to the scissor tool, and I'm just going to snip here and snip here. As you can see, we have now isolated this line from this panel. I'm going to click with my small selection tool. I'm going to click on this line. I'm going to go to my stroke and I'm just going to create a dashed line here, and let's make it 10 and 5. Doesn't matter as long as it's different to your actual panel. Okay, this is a guideline now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go select all. So I've selected everything and go Object and then Lock Selection. That way we can't select anything, nothing's going to get in the way. Next I'm going to get my pen tool. I'm going to click on this point here and also this point at the bottom. And I want this to be, I don't want this to be a dashed line, so I'm going to unclick dashed line and let's make it slightly thicker, so 1 point. Next, I'm going to go to my anchor point tool, click on the anchor point tool. I'm just going to click on this point, click and drag. I'm going to drag this out and I'm trying to mimic, you see that blue line? That's where it will be, it's the preview. So I'm just going to drag that until it roughly imitates the line that we already have there. Okay, you have to play around with it a little bit. So I'm using the existing guideline until we have something that matches it, and it's just removing that little point there. So I'm pretty happy with that line. So I'm just going to click off, and now I'm going to go Object and then Unlock All, so I can now start to edit this again. So I'm going to get my existing guideline here. We don't actually need it anymore, so I'm just going to, with my small selection tool, select it, and then hit backspace a few times. You want to make sure you hit backspace a lot, not just once, otherwise you'll be left with stray points. For example, if I hit backspace, you can see we haven't deleted all of it. So hit backspace a few times. Next, so once again, these two are completely separate, and I want them to be together because if I want to move it, I want this line to come with the pattern. So what I'm going to do is, with my small selection tool, I'm going to click and drag over these 2 points here, and I'm going to right click and then go join. Okay, I'm also going to go down to the bottom here, click and drag over those 2 bottom points, right click, join. So now, if I get my big selection tool, I can click and drag it and move it around, and that line's going to come with me, which is fabulous. Okay, so next we're going to work on the front panel because this is looking lovely. This is looking more like our raglan. So let's work on the back panel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my big selection tool. I'm going to click on this point. I'm going to go Edit, Copy, Edit, Paste. Paste it in. I'm going to mark it at this point just here. And I'm going to label it C. And once again, to do that, to label it C, just go to your small selection tool, double click on the text, and then you can just add it. Next, we're going to paste in a new point, and I'm going to take this point to be roughly one-third the distance of this curve, but from the top here. It's up to you where you place it. You could place it here, place it anywhere you want to. It's all about the style of your raglan, but I'm going to be consistent and keep it simple. It's about one-third here, so I'm going to do about one-third here as well. Let's then, small selection tool, double-click, hit D, or yeah, name this point D. So next, I'm going to simply get my pen tool, and I'm going to draw a line from point C, so click, and then click. And let's just make this 1 point. And now I'm going to go to my anchor point tool, or Shift-C on your keyboard. I'm just going to click and drag to create a nice even curve. You see how my point, this little bezier here, is kind of in the middle? It creates a nice, even, smooth curve. And let's just do something like that. That's quite sweet. Oh, once again, let's remove the fill. We just want a line, not a fill. And next, what I'm going to do is, apologies, I should have actually drawn this to the edge of point D here and to the edge of point C here, because we need that line to be outside of this block so we can cut it. So let's just get our small selection tool. I'm going to click on the line and then the point, and I'm just going to nudge it down with my arrow keys until it's pretty much in the center of D. Same with this one. Let's just move this across. You want to make sure that it doesn't come into your block. You want to make sure that it's at the center of C, but it's still outside, or it's extending outside of the block. Looking good. Okay, so next I'm going to go to my stroke, and I'm going to make that line 0.3. I'm going to go to Object, same as on the front, Expand, click OK, and once again you see now this is an object and no longer a line, and it's extending outside of our block, okay, on both sides. And what I'm going to do next is I'm going to get my small selection tool. I'm just going to click and drag over these two elements, the outline of my block and also this curved line, and I'm just going to go to my pathfinder and I'm going to go to minus front, and there you go. We've now separated that panel off, which is looking great. So if with my big selection tool, let's just click it. Once again, it is grouped with that pattern. So I'm just going to go to Object and then Ungroup. Now, if I click that with my big selection tool, you can see that it's a separate thing entirely and I can move it around. Before we remove it from the block, we want to add some notches because this is quite a long line. So when you come to sew it, you probably want a guide in the middle of where to match these two panels. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our line tool, which isn't actually on my palette here. Maybe it's, nope. Maybe it's in here. Okay, it's in here, but it will be on yours. If you followed our tutorial about how to set up Adobe Illustrator as a workspace, then this workspace will have been created for you and have all of these tools in front of you. But this is our line segment tool. And you can find this just simply by hitting the, what do you call it? By hitting the forward slash, or is it backslash? I believe it's backslash on your keyboard. There we go. So what I'm going to do is, with my line tool selected, I'm just going to click, and it will bring up this little dialog, and I'm going to call it 2 centimeters length, and the angle can be 0 for the time being. Now I'm doing 2 centimeters because I'm using a 1 center seam allowance. So essentially, well, let me just create it to show you. So I'm just going to click 2 cm and click OK, and this is my line. I'm going to go to my big selection tool, and I'm just going to find the center of this, click, and then drag it to meet that line. Just there. Perfect. Next I'm going to get my rotation tool. I'm going to click on the center of that and I'm going to rotate it until it's roughly a right angle to that line on both sides, okay? A right angle to this line here. Next I'm going to get my scissor tool, just here, and I'm going to snip it in half. So, as I said before, I'm using 1 cm seam allowance, so essentially this is 1 centimeter. So if I get my big section tool, select this block, and then also holding down the shift key, select this little notch here, I can then move them away together. So let me just do that again. So what I do is I'm going to, with my big selection tool, click on this panel. I'm going to hold down the shift key. This queues up selections, and I'm going to click on this notch. I'm then going to go to Object and then Group, and then when I move it away, that notch remains. This one, unfortunately, is still not attached to the other block. So I'm just going to get my big selection tool, click and drag over those two elements. I'm just going to go Object and then Group. So now you can see that if I add 1 cm seam allowance to this all the way around, this will actually meet the seam allowance. I'll show that very quickly. Object, path, offset path, 1 centimeter, and there you go. You see, so I'm making it 1 cm, or I'm making it 2 cm, and then simply extending it over those two lines, then snipping it, because then it'll be 1 cm when I add my seam allowance. Hope that makes sense. Anyway, so that's my back panel, and it's got its notch, which is looking brilliant. Next, what I'm going to do is, let's go to the front. Now at this point, we don't have a notch here, and that's a bit of a problem. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to simply get my big selection tool. I'm going to click on this point and drag it back to where it was, at point A. And you see, I probably want to add a notch halfway, but at this point, unfortunately, these two aren't really joined. They're not meshed together. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to simply trace my pattern. So I've selected this panel here, so big selection tool, click this panel, go to the rotation tool, and I'm just going to see where these lines start to diverge. I'm going to simply click my rotation at this point and just rotate until the lines overlap, and then we can add one here, and then just simply, so we're tracing, Jensen, we're tracing our pattern by using the rotation tool. So we just rotate. Okay, so it's a really lovely way of tracing your patterns. Anyway, let's start from the beginning. So big selection tool, I've selected this panel. Go to my rotation tool, find where the lines are about to diverge, click on that point, and then rotate. And roughly about here is where I want to place my notch. So once again, I'm going to get my line tool. Just going to hit the backspace on my keyboard, or you should be able to find it here as well. I'm just going to click, do 2 cm, press enter. Next, let's get my big selection tool. I'm just going to find the center of that, and then drop it about there. Get my rotation tool, click on the center point, and then rotate until it's roughly 90-degree angles from that line. Get the cut tool, snip. And now I'm going to get my big selection tool. I'm going to select this panel, hold down the shift key. I'm going to also select that notch. I'm then going to go object and group, and then I can move it away, and the notch is still there. Same with this one, big selection tool, click and drag over these two elements, object, group. Okay, so now we can move that around, and that notch is still present. Let's just clean up our pattern and remove some bits and pieces that we don't need anymore. For a start, we don't need these points, so I can just, with my big selection tool, select this point, hit backspace, backspace. I can also get rid of these points as well. I want to keep this one. I want to remove point C, point D, and that's looking fabulous. Okay, so next what we're going to do is we're going to move over to our sleeve block. This is when we actually transfer these panels to our sleeve to create the raglan. So as you can see, this was our existing sleeve, and we're now adding these panels to the top of our sleeve. So to do that, what I'm going to do is, first of all, let's just name these. So I've just gone to my text tool. So let's go to the text tool, and let's just call this front. And let's name this one, oops, let's copy and paste that. Let's name this back. Great, and I can just group those, group those. To be fair, if you want to group things quickly, you can just hit Command G on your keyboard. So once you've selected all of your items, just hit Command or Control G on your keyboard, and that will group them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these two panels, so big selection tool, take these two panels, I'm going to hit Edit, Copy, Edit, Paste. I just want to keep those where they are for now in case I lose this or something goes wrong. So let's have a look at the front first of all. Well, first of all, let's have a look at our actual sleeve. So we don't need half of the bits and pieces that are on here. So I'm going to remove this text. So big selection tool, just going to click and drag over this text, delete that with the backspace on my keyboard, delete, select, delete. We can delete this as well. Not that line. We want to keep that line. Let's get the point though. I might have to zoom in to get that point. Command or Control plus on your keyboard will zoom in. Okay, at the moment it's grouped. That's why it's selecting everything. So I'm just going to go Object, Ungroup, and then I'm going to delete that point. Great, so what I'm going to do is, first of all, let's work on the front. So I'm going to take this point here, and I'm just simply going to mesh it or place it over this point here. The reason why is because, as you can see, this point is where this sleeve meets the bodice. So essentially, this point needs to meet that point because we've separated it off. Does that make sense? You see how this point matches? We want to add this panel, and we're going to add it at this location. So once again, I'm going to get my big selection tool. I'm just going to click and drag on that point over to meet that dart. Sorry, not that dart, that location on the sleeve. And let's just zoom in and make sure that's in the right location. Let's zoom out, and then we're going to hit our rotation tool. So let's click rotate, click on that point, and then we're going to rotate that into the sleeve until we hit that top line. Okay, you see where that corner is meeting the top, or it's meeting my sleeve panel. We're going to do exactly the same for the back. Let's have a look. Where does the back actually join? So this is the lower dart, no, sorry, the lower notch, which is this one. So we can actually get rid of the upper one. We no longer need that. And we're then just simply going to place this point just there where that dart point is, okay? Because once again, same with the front, that's where these two are going to meet. So a big selection tool, going to click on this panel and then going to rotate it. I'm just going to rotate that in until it meets that top line. I might need to zoom in. So Command plus on your keyboard to zoom in and Command minus to move out. I'm just going to click and drag that, okay? We're still rotating here. You can see that's our rotation point just there. Just going to rotate that in until it meets the top of that sleeve panel. Great, we're almost there. We're getting there. So next what I want to do is I want to consolidate this block into a sleeve. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my small selection tool. I'm going to simply click and drag over these two panels. I'm then going to hold down the shift key and then just click on my sleeve panel. So all three of these have been selected, but nothing else has been selected. Let's go to our pathfinder tool and we're going to just unite. And as you can see already, it's starting to look a bit more like a raglan sleeve. So because we've united them, we've got this little piece here which we don't need. I'm just going to tidy this up a little bit. So I'm going to go to my minus selection tool, or delete anchor point tool. I'm just going to delete that point, and we can also delete maybe those two there. Let's just zoom in and show you that. So you see there's a point there we don't need anymore, and there's also a little point there that we don't need. Okay, great. Next what we're going to do is we're going to get a point. And I've deleted all my points, which is handy. So, yeah, no, I've deleted them. Let's create another point very quickly. Maybe don't delete yours. Let's call this point 1, because we've obviously used A, B, and C, whatever. So let's call this 1. Let's just then object and group those. I'm going to place point 1 just where that guideline... Oh, sorry, no, there's one thing we need to do first of all. Sorry, apologies. So what we're going to do is with our small selection tool, we're going to get this line and we're going to drag it over to meet that little point there. Okay? We're then going to go, we're going to select this line, we're going to go edit, copy, edit, and then paste. And we're going to drag it down until it meets the other side. And then we're simply going to paste another line in, and we're going to put it roughly in the middle somewhere. Let's say about, let's make it the same height, but roughly about there. Next, with my big selection tool, I'm going to click and drag over these three lines, and you can see here we have these align options. I'm just going to click horizontal distribute center. So as I do that, you can see that the line moves into place. I'll do that again. There you go. In fact, let's do that so you can really see. There you go, it just centralizes it. So that's essentially the center of our sleeve. So let's create that point again. Let's mark it as 1. Ooh, there we go. Let's just get, there we go. Okay, let's group that. And I'm going to just drag that point to this location, okay, to the center. So it's the top of the sleeve head and it's in the center of those 2 points. Next what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the enter key. So with this selected, so with the big selection tool, select this point. I'm going to hit enter on my keyboard, and this allows me to move either horizontally or vertically. I want to move vertically down by about 5 centimeters. I'm just going to hit copy. In fact, no, let's make it 4. It depends on how sloping or curved or smooth you want the curve on your shoulder to be, and I'll explain that in a minute. So let's hit the enter key and let's go down by 4. Let's hit copy. And we can name this point 2 if you really want to. Okay, so we've now marked point 2. This is where the start of our curve is going to be for the raglan. So this is the curve, and this is basically where the start is going to be. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Select All, Object, Lock. I'm going to lock all of this down, okay? And I haven't done that, so let's just do that now. So nothing is selectable. Next I'm going to get my pen tool, just here. Well, let's make sure we have the line selected, not the fill. And I'm just going to click on point 2, and I'm going to go, it depends on how curved you want it. So if you want a really tight shoulder, there you go, you could make your curve to be like this. If you want quite a sloping shoulder, you see how that's a lot more gradual. You could have a much smoother, cleaner curve there. So I'm going to do that. So once again, let's go to our pen tool. I'm going to go from point 2. I'm going to go roughly the same distance from 1 to 2 on my shoulder. So that's roughly about the same. I'm going to click and then drag, and I'm going to use that line, you see? I'm going to use that line, and then watching the other end of the bezier, I'm going to wait until it hits that center line, and that's a really nice smooth curve. You see how this bezier hits that center line? And we're using this line here. That creates a really beautiful curve. Okay, great. So now we've created this little piece here. I'm then just going to select it. So I'm going to get my big selection tool. I'm going to click on that line. I'm then going to right click and go transform, reflect, and then we want vertical. See, we're going to reflect it across the vertical axis and hit copy. And I'm just going to simply click and drag that to meet point 2. Next, we're going to rotate it. So I'm going to get my rotation tool, I'm going to click, and I'm going to rotate that until it roughly meets that point there, so until it meets the shoulder line, which is great. So we've now started to create our curve. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go Object, and I'm going to go Unlock All, so we can now start to edit this other block, so our actual sleeve block. And what we want to do is, so you see here, this line is actually connecting at this point. So with my small selection tool, I want to click on this line. I then want to get my scissor tool, and then you see how it's locating that point. Just going to hover along that line till I find the intersect point, and we're just going to snip. And then here as well, I'm actually going to snip, let's say, up here. I'll explain why in a minute. So now, as you can see, if I click on this line with my small selection tool, click on this line, you can see that only this panel is selected. Let's just delete that. Okay, so it's hitting backspace. So I'm just going to select the bit we've cut out and hit backspace. And you know what? I'm actually going to turn this into pink so we can see it a bit clearer. Click OK. There we go. So once again, let's just go back. Let's make that pink. Okay. So once again, as you can see here, we've actually cut at these points. And I'm just going to hit backspace on my keyboard. Next, I'm going to get my small selection tool. I'm going to click. I'm going to find this little point here. I'm going to click and drag that until it meets this shoulder. In fact, you know what? It's still got a slight nick there. So I'm going to go back. I'm actually going to cut this just about there. And I'm going to remove that completely. It's just so we get a nice, clean, smooth line. You see how that line's much cleaner and smoother. So once again, I just simply snip that point. I'm going to get my small selection tool. I'm going to click on that point and drag it down. Next, I'm going to join these. At the moment, they're completely separate. So I'm going to get my small selection tool. I'm going to click and drag over those 2 points. I'm then going to right-click and hit Join. Once again, same here. I'm going to click and drag over those 2 points. I'm going to right-click and go Join. Okay, lovely. So now our sleeve is looking a bit more like a raglan. I just want to make sure that this is one complete item. So I'm going to select the outline of this, and I'm then going to go to my pathfinder and click on that, what do you call it, Unite. That just ensures that this is one panel piece. We can now get rid of some of the guff or some of the bits and pieces we don't need. So this point here we can remove. Just going to delete that. I'm going to drag this point away in case I need a point again. And we can also get rid of this one and also this one. And we can probably drag, so with my small selection tool, I can click and drag that down. There we go. So it's the center of my sleeve. Okay, and we can get rid of the back and the front because we know that's the back and that's the front. So pretty much, this is pretty much a raglan sleeve completed. There is just a few more things we need to think about, and that is essentially cleaning up this line. You see how we have this little point here? It's not very good when it comes to pattern making. You know, we don't really want a point in our sleeve. We want it to be nice and smooth and curved. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a really beautiful long sweeping curve here, and the same for this one, and for this one as well. We can actually get rid of these 2 panels because we no longer need them. So let's begin. I'm going to do exactly the same as I did before. I'm going to get my small selection tool. I'm going to select the outline of this pattern. I'm going to get my scissor tools and just snip here, snip here, snip here, snip here. So I'm isolating these lines away from the main pattern. You see? And then with this line selected and this line selected, I'm just going to go to my add it as a dashed line. Okay, it's going to be a guideline for us to create a much cleaner, beautiful curve. Once again, I want to go select all, object, and then lock. Oops, object, lock, selection. So I can't edit anything. We're then going to go to our pen tool, and I'm going to click a point here, and then we're going to go about 1 cm away from this point. Okay, I'm going to click a point here and a point here, and let's just make that. Let's just make that a thick line, so not a dashed line. So I'm 1 cm roughly away from this point. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my anchor point curve tool, this little doodah. I'm just going to simply click and drag. And you see how I'm just matching that bottom curve as best as I can. And you see the top is alright, it's not perfect. It's pretty close, but it's not perfect. I'm just going to move that down ever so slightly. And I'm going to just move the top out ever so slightly as well. And this is all done with that anchor point tool. Let me show you that again. So we have a straight line, we go to our anchor point tool. If I click and drag, you see how I can create a curved line here. So I'm just going to click and drag ever so slightly until I match that bottom curve. The top is slightly off, so clicking on this one. So once I've released it, I'm just going to click on this handle. You see I can manipulate this individually now. What I want to do is I want to maintain a nice straight line. You see those Beziers are now in a nice straight line? I'll show you. This is a nice straight line. You don't want this point to be like that. You want it to be a nice straight line, but you also want it to follow the line of your existing pattern. So I'm just going to move that in, and then the top, we can do the same. Just going to move that, move that out ever so slightly. You can play with this as much as you like. It's up to you. Once again, let's just move this in a little bit. Possibly I'm overthinking this a bit too much, but there we go. That's not too bad. We're losing a little bit here, but that's not the end of the world. Maybe we can drag this in a little bit. It's just to create a reasonably nice, smooth line. Right, let's give that an outline. In fact, let's make that a little bit, let's up the point on that so you can see it. So that is a much cleaner, smoother curve. In fact, you know what, I might move this point down a little bit more. That'll bring that in a little bit more. Let's move this up, and let's pull this out. In fact, I'm going to get rid of that point completely. See if I can make it now. Yeah, no, I definitely need that point at the top. Sorry, I'm faffing. I'm a bit of a perfectionist sometimes. There we go. You can play with this as much as you like, but just ensure that the line here is straight. Okay, let's do the same for the front. So I'm going to click on this point, click on this point, and click on this point. I'm then going to go to my anchor tool, sorry, my convert anchor point tool. Oh, Alexa, stop. Sorry, that was my that was my lunchtime alarm. Obviously, it's time for lunch. Okay, sorry. So let's go to the anchor point tool. I'm going to click on this point here, and I'm just going to simply click and drag to match that line. And then same for the top. Let's just click and drag that slightly in more. Oh, sorry, I've actually done. Right, I'm messing this up a little bit. Sorry, let's do that again. Let's go to the pen tool. I'm going to click at this point. I'm going to click 1 cm below this roughly, okay? That was why, that was the issue. So I'm going to click about 1 cm below that point, and also here as well. And then let's go to my convert anchor point tool, click and drag. There we go, that's much nicer. You see how that works, much better. And then let's just sort that top piece out. So that's really close. The front is looking far nicer than the back, but that's good. We're pretty close here. We're not out by much. So next I'm going to go to Object. I'm going to unlock everything, and I'm going to try and find that dotted line and get rid of it. So you see this dotted line? I'm just going to get my small selection tool. I'm going to click on it. I'm going to delete it. Hit backspace a few times. Same for this one. Select it. Hit backspace a few times. Now as you can see, my notches here are slightly out of whack. That's fine. What we're going to do is small selection tool, click and drag. In fact, no, let's use the big selection tool. I'm going to click on this line, hold down the shift key, click on this point as well, and then I'm just going to simply, with my keyboard, just nudge them. So I'm just kind of like translating and moving it out. So I'm just nudging with my arrow keys on my keyboard to move that point out. And we can even, if you want to be a perfectionist, mark the rotation and then just make sure it's at a 90-degree. There we go. Same with this one, big selection tool. Let's just click and drag over these 2 points. And I'm just going to, with my arrow keys, nudge that out, maybe up a little bit. There we go. And then I'm just going to get my rotation tool, click on the center, and then just make sure it's 90 degrees. Looking good. Okay, next, as you can see, this is not joined to our curves, which is a problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get my small selection tool, click and drag over those 2 points, right click, join. Same with the bottom. Right click, join, join, and then this one as well, join. And then once again, just to make sure everything's joined here, I'm just going to go to my pathfinder and unite. Great. Okay, so now let's do exactly the same that we've done for the sleeve on here, because we still have this little nick. So what I'm going to do is, once again, we're going to select all, object, lock, object, lock, selection. Actually, let's not do that. Let's first of all cut. So I'm going to go to a small selection tool. I'm going to select this line here, go to my scissors, I'm going to cut, do the same here, cut, and then let's just turn these two into dashed lines. Great. Then we go select all, object, lock selection. And now we're going to create these curves. So once again, let's go to our pen tool. Let's make this 2 points. And let's not make it dashed so we can actually see it. So we're going to mark a point here. We're going to go about 1 cm down from this notch, about here and here. Next we get our convert anchor point tool. And then we're just going to click and drag to trace that bottom curve. Generally, if you trace the bottom one first, the top one will follow. It will probably need a little bit of adjustment. Once again, let's just pull that out ever so slightly, not too much, making sure that's a nice straight line with these Beziers. So once again, nice straight line. And then let's go to the anchor point tool and let's sort out the top. Let's move this out a little bit. We can pull this down ever so slightly. That's looking not too shabby. Maybe move this out a little bit as well. You can play around with it. But that's pretty much on point, which is great. Let's then do this one. So pen tool, click my pen tool, point, point, and then point. Let's get my anchor point tool, and then click and drag. We're going to use that bottom curve first, and then there we go. Let's just shape that a little bit, and let's move that down till we have a reasonably nice curve. I'm quite happy with that. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on this because hang on a minute, I've done it wrong again. Hang on. Okay, let's get rid of this. I keep forgetting about going 1 cm down, so sorry, that's why I'm getting an odd curve. I'm going to click at this point. I'm going to go about 1 cm lower than that point there, and I'm going to click on that point. I've practiced this so many times, and yet I keep forgetting. Then I'm just going to simply click and drag. It's probably good practice to see this, and you see that. Look at that. That curve is just perfect. It's on point. Okay, so now we've created our curves, and this is a beautiful curve, this is a nice curve, etc. I'm then going to go to Object, Unlock All. Let's zoom in, Command plus on my keyboard, find that dotted line, delete, delete, delete. Find, if I can, I might have drawn it very well. In that case, what I'll do is I'm going to select this line, the new curved line, go Object, lock it, so I can't select it anymore, and that will allow me to select the line underneath, which is the dashed line. As you can see, that's the dashed line. I'm just going to delete it. I'm then going to go Object, Unlock All. And now we want to make sure that these darts are in the right location. So once again, to be fair, that should have a little ball on the end of it, because that's our master notch. Let's just group those. Okay, so I'm just going to select this. I'm going to nudge it in. There we go. I'm going to get my rotation tool and just click and oops, not quite on the point there. Click on that point and rotate. Looking good. Same here. Let's just select both of them and group them. I'm going to nudge that in till it meets that line, maybe down a tiny bit. And I'm going to rotate. Almost 90-degree angle. Great. So now that is pretty much our finished raglan pattern. There's just one last thing we need to do. Well, there's not, there's a few things, but I need to join this line to this block. So once again, small selection tool, click and drag over these two endpoints, right click, join, click and drag, right click, join, click and drag. Oh, well, we can average as well if you want. Let's go join, join. Great, so now we want to make sure that this is absolutely perfect, this pattern, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, because at the moment, look, half of the bits aren't coming with us. So if I move this pattern, we're losing a lot of information here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my big selection tool, click and drag, and I'm going to group. So just Object and then obviously group. Same with this one. This is one panel piece. I'm going to Object and then I'm going to group. Click and drag over all of this. Object, group. So now that when we move them around, look at that. They're all individual. Sorry, not individual. They're all one element. So this is our front and this is our back. I'm now going to trace our sleeve to see if it works. So first of all, let's start at this point. I'm going to get my big selection tool. I'm going to click and drag. This is just perfecting your block. Essentially, it's finished, but we're just going to perfect it to make sure it works beautifully. So once again, I'm dragging. Let's just zoom out. This is my front, and this is the front of my sleeve. This is the underarm point. This is the underarm point. I'm going to match these two together, like so. I'm then going to get my rotate tool. I'm going to click on that point. Let's zoom in a little bit. And I'm going to rotate it round. You see how I'm now matching the sleeve with the block. And I'm just going to keep rotating this. Like we did before, we traced that existing seam. I'm just going to trace this round to see if my notches actually meet up. And this might be a little bit time consuming, but once you get the hang of it, it's actually quite quick, and it does produce beautiful patterns. I'll show you another way of doing this as well. There we go. Okay, so I'm ever so slightly off, but that's not the end of the world. I was going to be because I was kind of just moving them around as I saw fit. There we go, let's move that to that point. Mark that point. There we go. So now what I can do is I can actually move that into the right location. So I can take this panel here, get my small selection tool. I'm just going to hold down the shift and, hang on, I'm just going to select this point and this point, and I'm just going to nudge that up like that so it's in the correct location. And I'm going to continue rotating this sleeve. Okay, so I've got to this point, I've adjusted the point to be in the right location, or the notch to be in the right location. I'm then going to get to my rotation tool, click, and then rotate, because I want to match the top one as well. I also want to make sure that the top neckline is looking good as well. Oh, look, it's not quite right, is it? It's not perfect. My first one was absolutely spot on, which is really thoroughly annoying. But that's fine, I'll show you how to adjust this. So I'm just going to adjust this point here, and I'm going to pull this point here as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take both of these points, so small selection tool, I'm going to take, actually no, you know what, I'm going to move this point, right, sorry. So once I've actually matched these 2 points together, I'm going to take that sleeve panel, I'm just going to once again rotate it close, just like that. And you see here we've got this slight step. It's not great. My last one was absolutely perfect. It's really annoying. I'm just simply going to small selection tool, click on these two, or click and select these 2 endpoints. I'm going to right click and go average, and that will average those points together. Possibly I can just nudge it over a little bit just to create a slightly cleaner neckline curve there. Okay, we're going to do exactly the same with the back panel now. So I'm going to get my sleeve panel here. This is the underarm point. So let's just zoom out and show you what we're doing here. So once again, we've done the front now, and we've matched it to this. We're going to do the back. So I'm going to get this point. I'm going to match it to this location. Get my rotation tool, just there. Click on that as a rotation point, and then I'm just going to swing that round. Let's zoom in. Swing that round, and just add that rotation point as I go. You know what? Maybe it's because I rushed it a little bit. Let's be really super careful when it comes to tracing these points. There we go, a little bit more delicate, because it does make a huge difference, because those little slight, being out ever so slightly can cause that line to be slightly shorter. Look at this, see? This one's far nicer, it's much more on point. But you know what, I am just going to move. So small selection tool, just going to select that point and this point, just going to nudge that up. There we go, in the right location. Let's then keep moving this sleeve. So where's my rotation tool? Click on the rotation tool, there we go, rotate that round, and look, this one's going to be pretty much spot on. Possibly on the other one I just wasn't being careful enough when it came to tracing my pattern. So there we go, that's just looking good. Those 2 notches don't need to be moved. Same here as well, that's looking pretty spot on, I'm quite happy with that. What you could do if you want to be perfect, get your small selection tool, click and drag, right click, average, and then they will be, you want to have both. Click OK, and they'll be perfect. Alright, so that is pretty much it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my sleeve over to the side. I now know that all my notches work, etc. Let's just rotate this so it's actually along the grain line. Should be about it. And let's just move over to the right. So now what we're going to do is add some seam allowance to this just to finish off the pattern. So I'm going to get my small selection tool. I'm going to select just the outline and click and drag. So hold down the shift key to queue up selections. So I'm going to click on this one, hold down the shift key, click on this outline, click on this outline, and now we're going to go object, path, offset path, and we're going to add 1 centimeter seam allowance just by simply entering it here. You can also add 0.5 if you want. It can be 0.75, it can be an inch, whatever you want to do, you can add it here. But I'm going to use 1. Miter limit, doesn't really matter, just make it 4. You can preview it as well. Just click OK, and that's your seam allowance. What I generally do is, with the seam allowance selected, I normally make this slightly higher pointage. So at the moment it's 2, so let's make the inside line. Let's click this one, and this one. Inside line I'm going to make 1. There we go, so it just shows you that's a cut line, this is our cut line, and this is our sewing line. Also, oops, sorry, excuse me. Also, let's just remove the seam allowance from the center front, just because we want to cut this on fold. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get my small selection tool, I'm going to click on this line and just move it over to the left. And if I want to be really fancy, I can cut the top edge, the bottom edge. I can then, you see, select the inner line, and I can just simply snip, snip. I can then delete that inner line. So we just have the seam allowance line. I can go to my points, bring the point down, give it a dash line, maybe make it 30-10, and then we have a more, it just makes it a bit obvious that that is a center front fold. Sorry, a center front, or place on fold. So let's go to my big section tool. Let's just make sure that these are all grouped. So object, yeah, let's just group it. Control G to group things. Group. And there we go. That is our finished beautiful raglan sleeve block. And you know what we can do as well, if you want to basically separate the sleeve out, is we can get our small selection tool, select this inside stitching line, and we get our cut tool and just snip and snip at the bottom here. And then, in fact, you know what, let's just remove our seam allowance. So small selection tool, delete the seam allowance again. Let's get this line here, let's cut it, because we're going to separate these two. And then I'm going to get my small selection tool. Actually, let's get the big selection tool. I'm going to click it. I'm going to go Object, Ungroup, and then going to get my big selection tool, click and drag. That's still grouped. So click it, Object, Ungroup. Grab all this, move it over to the right. So I'm just simply nudging it with my keyboard here. If you hold down the Shift key, you'll do big nudges. If you don't hold down the Shift key, it's little nudges. Or you can just simply drag it away. What we'll do is get my small selection tool, click on this outline here, and then go to the pathfinder and just unite. Click on this one, unite. And there we have a sleeve that's been divided into two. And now I'm going to add seam allowance to that. So small selection tool, click and drag over these two items, object, path, offset path, 1 cm, done. Let's make sure that's a 2-point line, and there is our raglan sleeve block. And I'm just now simply big selection tool, clicking and dragging, and then just going object, and I'm grouping them. Same here as well, object, group. And that is our finished pattern, looking gorgeous. Okay, so if you have any questions on this tutorial, which I'm sure there'll be many, yeah, please let me know in the comments. Once again, we're taking requests only on our Instagram platform, so please feel free to follow along or subscribe to us, follow us, and you can then obviously make comments on our different tutorials and obviously request different tutorials for yourself. So maybe you want to do like a blouson sleeve or a cap sleeve or any kind of, let's say, pattern making technique, let me know and we will have a look and see if we can do it. In the meantime, thank you so much to, Thank you so much to JK for suggesting this tutorial. I hope you enjoy it and let us know your feedback. Okay, take care. Thank you.